Hello. Maybe I'll speak into this mic, it seems a bit easier. So thank you for having me. Thank you to our amazing host, Chinachem and the Hong Kong Green Building Council. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in Hong Kong with all of you, speaking to you about the work that World Green Building Council does, and specifically in my role as Director of Global Advocacy, how policy change can drive transformative change in our built environment. So really excited to be here to speak to all of you and learn what's happening in this wonderful, wonderful city. So it's already been explained, I think, very articulately this morning that we're actually losing the climate battle. No matter where you are in the world, you are facing the impacts of climate change right now. Where I live, in Europe, we have seen wildfires this year. We're seeing extreme temperatures, and we're also seeing a lot of rainfall that's excessive, and that's something that I've heard is also happening here. So no matter where we are losing the climate battle. So what does that mean? It really means we need to scale up our decarbonisation solutions now. Buildings are responsible for 40% of carbon emissions, 50% of extracted materials, and that's the global impact that we're seeing in our sector. This is huge. And while we are looking at this impact, we are expecting to see the world's building stock to double by 2060. So we have a huge tension point where we already have a very high emitting sector and one that's actually going to grow. But that doesn't mean that those challenges aren't without opportunities. We know that efficient buildings are going to be worth nearly 25 trillion by 2030. But all of this is in the context that, we are facing a very alarming time. So we really need to start looking at what are the solutions and how do we scale them up and what are the avenues that we do this. And I was really excited already to hear from Donald talking about the collaboration and bringing everyone together, because that's where I see we're going to be able to address the science. Because the science is very, very alarming. I'm always a bit reluctant to share the information that is coming out of these reports, but I think it's really important to ground us and remind us as to where we are. So these are just reports that have come out in the last year. A lot of them are actually due to be updated this month. But what we're seeing from each of these reports is that the impact of climate change is worsening. The emissions gap in our sector in buildings is widening. If you look here at the closing window, the emissions gap report, what that tells us when it comes to buildings is we need to reduce excess floor area, we need to reduce energy intensity, carbon intensity, and also address the embodied emissions. The State of Climate Action report, that tells us that we need to be looking at driving systems transformation, so looking at the building sector and how do we actually drive systems change there. So that's really alarming. And then we also have from the UN itself and the IPCC some extremely concerning reports that if you look at all of the policies that are being put forward to comply with the goals of the Paris Agreement, implementation of those policies as they are will keep us within a 2.5-degree scenario. That's 1 degree more than where we need to be under the terms of the Paris Agreement. So there's a lot of challenges that we're facing. I'm very optimistic that we can meet them. And the reason I'm optimistic is because of the work of our collective network. So World Green Building Council, we are a global network of 75 green building councils, and we're working to accelerate action and implementation solutions for green buildings around the globe. Hong Kong Green Building Council are obviously a member of World Green Building Council, and we work very closely with our green building councils to drive local solutions. And that's what's really important, because as a global organisation, we can only talk so much about what needs to be done. What you really need is local actors on the ground who are delivering those solutions and working with the community, the local community, to bring them forward and to do that implementation piece. So we call ourselves the world's largest regional local action network. We partner with over 60 partners at World GBC level, but actually collectively our 75+ members across the globe, they represent over 46,000 members. So together we are working to achieve our vision, which is for a sustainable built environment for everyone, everywhere. And the way we're aiming to achieve this is through driving the systemic change that is needed now. So we focus on 3 critical impact areas and 2 levers of change. So we have climate action, resources and circularity, health, well-being, and social equity. And across those 3 impact areas, what we're doing is working to deliver on very ambitious goals for 2030. So when you look at climate action, it's about getting to net zero carbon in operation, but also looking at a 40% reduction in embodied carbon emissions, because as we address the operational challenge, what we're going to see is the share of embodied go up. We also have some very ambitious goals on resources and circularity. We're not going to be able to get to a zero carbon built environment unless we're looking at the circularity challenge. And obviously, when we're talking about buildings, we can't just be looking at the carbon impact or we have to look at things in a holistic manner. So we also are looking at the health, well-being, and social equity. So my job at World Green Building Council is to look at how do we advance those policy levers, because I really believe if we are really going to address the climate challenge and the emissions gap, we need much, much more ambitious policies. Every country who signed up to the Paris Agreement has agreed to submit, they are legally obliged to submit what are called nationally determined contributions. And those NDCs, as we call them, they should set out the collective progress that you're making as a country, as a government, towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. All of the analysis on those NDCs tells us that they're simply not good enough to close the gap. And when it comes to buildings, although some of them mention buildings, they don't go anyway near enough the depth and coverage that we need them to go. So my role at World GBC is to bring together a network of green building councils to come together with common policy asks for buildings. And that's what we've done this year. So just earlier this year, we've published something called Global Policy Principles for a Sustainable Built Environment. These have been developed with all of those 75 green building councils I mentioned. And what we did was we came together and we discussed what are the common challenges that you see in policy and what are the gaps that we need to address in policy globally. And this is what we came up with. We have 7 key principles: carbon, resilience, circularity, water, biodiversity, health, equity, and access. So what we were able to do was get consensus amongst all of those green building councils representing all corners of the globe that if governments are going to update their policies or develop new policies related to buildings, they need to cover these aspects. Obviously, when you're talking about things that are global in nature, it is obviously hard to go into a huge amount of detail. So we have these very high-level principles that we're able to agree on. So, for example, if you look at carbon, it's about renovation of existing buildings, looking at operational and embodied across the whole life cycle. We also have principles related to resilience, biodiversity, water, health, equity, and access. And if you go into that document, what you will see then is different levers of change to deliver on that. So, for example, if you're speaking to a local government and you want them to update their policies, you can look at these principles and you can say, right, we want to look at carbon. You've got this high-level principle. What else can we do? And what this resource does is it points you to a library of resources that we could, for example, on carbon, looking at minimum energy performance standards, whole life carbon reporting. So what we really want to do with these is to bring the message forward that policy change in the built environment is needed. It's needed specifically on carbon, but it also needs to look at things in a holistic manner and the built environment in an integrated way, and that's really important. And it's really important this year because in 3 weeks' time, there will be a delegate from World Green Building Councils going to Dubai to represent the building sector at COP28. I myself will be going, and the message that we will be bringing to that conference is that governments really need to step up ambition and action, and that they need to be really profiling the importance of buildings as a key solution to deliver on the global goals on the Paris Agreement. So that's extremely important, and the reason it's extremely important this year is because we're halfway through what everyone is calling the decade of action. We're still not seeing the level of action and implementation that we need. So we really want to be championing the built environment voice, but also we are going through a process right now globally called the global stocktake. So at COP28, the conclusion of the global stocktake is going to take place. And the global stocktake is essentially a sense check on what our collective progress towards the goals of the Paris Agreement look like? So not just initiatives from the private or from the public sector, but also from the private sector. And collectively, are we on track? Unfortunately, as you may have guessed, the answer is we are not on track yet. But I believe that if we go with a strong voice and we talk about the solutions that the built environment sector players are playing, we can start closing that gap. So just to give you a bit of a sneak peek on what the global stocktake is saying, because a synthesis report came out in September that gave us a bit of a peek into what the global stocktake might tell us. As I said, it's telling us that we're probably off track, but it encouragingly does recognise the role and potential of buildings, and that is really important because we really want to see the political leaders at COP get behind buildings, because the global stocktake is going to send a signpost on where governments need to fill gaps in their NDCs, and they're obliged to send those NDCs in 2025, and they will start working on them hopefully sooner rather than later. So we really need to get that message across. The other thing we're looking forward to at COP is the announcement of something called the Buildings Breakthrough. So the Breakthrough Agenda is something that was first started at COP26, and essentially it was a bunch of governments representing high emitting sectors coming together to say, for example, in steel, in power, in hydrogen, we are going to commit to these ambitious goals as a government and drive international collaboration to deliver on them. At COP28, the Breakthrough Agenda is going to be expanded, and we're going to see the launch of the Buildings Breakthrough, and that is being led by France and the Kingdom of Morocco. And what the Buildings Breakthrough calls for is near zero emission and resilient buildings are the new normal by 2030. So it's a very high level goal again, but then when you look into the detail of what is within that, you will see that, it's talking about, energy efficiency, whole life cycle, how do you actually achieve all of that? And the idea is that governments come to COP, commit themselves to the Buildings Breakthrough, but then actually the real work is actually in the implementation, and that's where I believe there's a role for our network of GBCs and their members to deliver on the Buildings Breakthrough. So we're very much looking forward to the launch of the Buildings Breakthrough. And the message that we're really bringing to COP this year is one of confidence. What we want to do at COP is build confidence that, as World GBC and a network of local GBCs, we know that we can make the transition to a sustainable future a reality. GBCs already have the solutions to help governments and business to build that transition to energy efficient, regenerative and just future. And governments can have confidence that GBCs can support them in the delivery of any ambitious policies that they might sign up to at COP. And also to businesses, I think I'm preaching to the converted here, but to demonstrate to them that sustainability is not going to hurt their bottom line. And that message of confidence is something that we really, really want to see, because what we want to see in the negotiated outcome at COP is real progress when it comes to our built environment sector, and that policymakers really understand that our sector is responsible for 40% and that they have an opportunity to close that gap by taking action. And here I just have a couple of logos of some of the projects that we do, where we can actually say, this is the confidence that we have. So we have our Building Life project in Europe, which is all about tackling whole life carbon, operational and embodied. We've developed an EU policy roadmap on how that will happen at the EU level, but also our national green building councils are working on that at the national level. We've our Advancing Net Zero project, which I know many of you in the room will have gotten behind, and the Hong Kong Green Building Council have worked on, and that's all about how do we get to net zero, and is now looking as well at embodied emissions as well, and also the Circularity Accelerator. So we know through our projects, through our programs, through our GBCs and our partners that we have the solutions. And this is a bit of a call to action. I know there's many people in the room, there's many people who are joining online. One of the things that we will be doing as World GBC alongside our partners is to really put this message of confidence out there. And we're going to be putting an open letter to be published halfway through COP to really do a rallying call to the negotiators to say the building sector has a role to play, and here is 46,000 organisations, if we really hit our goal, who can support that. So you should be getting correspondence about that in the next couple of days via your local GBC. And I would really encourage you to sign up to that call to action and demonstrate that collective confidence that we can all have in policy change and the fact that we can all bring the solutions. So I will leave you on that note. I have much more to say on policy, but I only had 20 minutes. So if you have any questions or want to hear about any of the policy changes that we're working on, I'd be more than happy to speak to any of you over the lunch break or the course of any of the breaks. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers and hearing what's happening in this wonderful city.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. NUGENT. Thank you. Please be seated.